Their description, everybody knows what Firefox is. So we did a general analysis. We did a lot more on this one. They were a lot more interested in Firefox. The Army was, so I actually did multiple versions instead of just one specific version. And we had at least 51% and at most 86% of reported vulnerabilities were in data handling. So the data structure manipulation, which we talked about earlier, that was the best predictor of vulnerabilities in Firefox. So for that, what you would want to, or what we ended up finding is that would be one of the times we thought if you're going to analyze web browsers, then you would want to give more weight to the DSM than to anything else. OpenSSH, everybody knows what that is. And we had a 3.8 P1, 31 vulnerable modules were identified. 18 of the 31 vulnerable modules were in the top 10%, which is, again, I say pretty good. It makes your life a lot easier if you're looking for security bugs, if you can say the top 10% was actually accurate. And the tough thing with this research also is that there could be still unknown vulnerabilities in software. So when it gives you a top 10 vulnerable module, we're kind of basically all we can actually look at is the ones that have been identified. So there could be, our numbers could actually be higher. If there's unknown vulnerabilities in that top 10%, that we could actually have much better numbers, but we don't know. We didn't actually do source code auditing and say, okay, well, let's try to find exploits in OpenSSH or Apache or anything like that. We were just looking at existing vulnerabilities and try to see if we could find those. Then we get over to Drupal, and that's it's actually new research is going on right now with a grad student named Zele, and Drupal's in PHP. So again, a different language. The other ones were all C, C++, and everybody knows what it is. So anyways, what we ended up finding with Drupal, well, some of my work is Dolores ended up naming it the Drupal Vulnerability Miner, but it was a lot easier than Firefox, where I was like manually collecting this stuff. I actually just wrote a Perl tool that we called the Drupal Vulnerability Miner, and the Drupal community has an actual security site that's like really good about reporting the vulnerabilities and where exactly the vulnerabilities are and how they were caused. So that whole thing, the Drupal Vulnerability Miner, goes out and is able to just parse through that data and automatically generate what we needed. We have these Excel spreadsheets that show, okay, this is the vulnerability, this is where it was in code, this is what caused it. So then when we go with our metrics, then we compare the two. So that was just something that I did that made things a lot faster. And on our PHP source code analysis, we're still designing, I'm not, but Dolores is still designing the PHP to XML tool so that she can, because basically we have this XML definition of it's a generic definition. So then let's say you had C or Java or PHP or Perl or whatever. You want to take that, instead of actually like scanning through Perl, you actually have a parser that converts it into a standard XML definition, and then the metrics are run on that. So then basically, if we need to add a new language for our metrics, we just write a new XML, basically a parser that converts it over to this XML definition. So that way we're not language specific. We have I think they said, like, maybe it was 8 or 10 years ago, one of the government people came to them and said, hey, we need you to do Ada. So, okay, well, we did do C, so they just, this is the whole idea behind this, making it a little more generic. So after showing all that stuff on this project, the benefits that we felt, like I said earlier, is to know where your vulnerabilities reside. If you're doing, especially if you're you're on a team and you're trying to find if there are vulnerabilities in your code and you're trying to audit the source, it's very helpful to know where to start looking first. Now, of course, you're skilled. We've talked to people from different sponsors that have their actual, skilled source code auditors, and those guys are like, oh, we know where to look, and we're pretty good at it. But this was still helpful to them. They said, it is beneficial. There's things that they may not, because they kind of have like a pattern of what they look for. There may be stuff they aren't, don't usually look for, and this helps with that. So pretty much being able to analyze all these different technologies, like you have your web server, OpenSSH, et cetera, you can cover all these different systems, and that's one of the big benefits we felt. Like a lot of these scanners out there will say, hey, I can look at C code, and especially a lot of your static analysis that just says, I can find, it can find buffer overflows in C. and that, you know, it's a specific thing that it's looking for, a very specific pattern that's very limited. So with ours, we're trying to say we can take all these different languages, you know, any language out there, we could do metrics on it. And, you know, we feel that's a really big benefit, because if you have, you know, you code in C and you have a C scanner and that works for you, but then let's say all of a sudden for some reason your company decides to use OCaml, and you're like, well, are there any OCaml, you know, vulnerability scanners? Well, probably not. So you could actually, you know, get the XML definition into our system, run metrics on it, and it would show you the fault and vulnerability prone modules. So our next research steps is basically to continue analysis of open source systems. We're trying to find other primitives to identify other security weaknesses, because, you know, like I said, we didn't identify 100%, so we think there should be metrics out there that will help to better find all those vulnerabilities. And one thing, you know, they said when I was out here to ask is if anybody has any systems that they want analyzed, then that would be something too. You could contact them, and if you have some source code, they've worked with all different agencies and companies, so, you know, NDAs and clearances and all that stuff's no problem for anybody that has those. And that's it. Go on to questions.